Very much for joining this webinar presented by FinTech Australia and the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. My name is Stuart Keane and I'm the Community Manager at FinTech Australia and a Global Engagement Manager for FinTech at Austrade. I'm really pleased to be joined by you all today. And firstly, I would like to hand over to our moderator for the event, Shannon Lee, Austrade Trade and Investment Commissioner based in Hanoi. Thank you very much, Shannon.
Thanks, Stu, for your introduction, and thanks to FinTech Australia for bringing us all together today for this session. As Stu mentioned, I'm Shannon Lay, Australia's Trade Commissioner to Vietnam, based in Hanoi. And I'd also like to acknowledge on the call Senior Trade Commissioner Rebecca Ball and my colleague Nyung Chan, Business Development Manager Hanoi, who will be presenting later in the session. For those of you who are not familiar with Austrade, we're Australia's trade and investment agency. And in FinTech, we play a role in connecting Australian exporters of technology and services to international markets. I'm delighted to moderate today's discussion on FinTech in Vietnam. And whilst we have the expert presenters and panelists with us, I'll keep my comments on the market brief. But other than to say Vietnam most certainly should be on the radar for Australia's technology industry in looking for growth within Asia. We are seeing in the work that we do on a daily basis, the growing digitalisation across all sectors in Vietnam. And there's a positive nexus here between government, industry and consumers all moving in the same direction towards digitalisation. So significant opportunities which our panellists and presenters will go into today. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today with Vietnam experience, and we hope you enjoy the hour. We've got a lot to pack in over the next hour. On that note, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Long Vo. Long leads PwC's consulting practice in Vietnam, and prior to PwC, Long led digital initiatives in one of Vietnam's fastest growing banks and managed a leading technology company in Vietnam. Long will open our session today with an overview of Vietnam's financial services landscape and digital trends. Thank you, and over to you, Long.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Depends on where you are. So in the next 10 minutes, I have quite ambitious agenda, but I'm trying to fit it in 10 minutes. First of all, I would like to share with you the banking and fintech landscape here in Vietnam, and especially the fintech opportunities. And then probably, we will look through very quickly in terms of how to really approach with the fintech here in Vietnam. Right? So next chart, please. Thank you. First of all, despite the COVID hit in Vietnam, we managed, as a country, we managed to contain the impact of the COVID-19 to a certain extent, and especially in financial services. I think that this is, impacting, but it's also help, not really help, but strong performance in the financial sectors. Despite the impact in the last 2 years, and especially lockdown in recent months from April until end of September, we've been forecasting a strong growth in terms of GDP for Vietnam, and hopefully we will finish this year 2021 with 4.8% of the growth, and looking for even more in 2022. At the same time, if you look at the digital economy potential in Vietnam, I would say that Vietnam is in the verge of another round of the booming in terms of fintechs and technology in general. First of all, if we talk about the smartphone penetrations, then this is a 63% of the smartphone penetration in Vietnam. And if overall in terms of internet and smartphone penetration, I would say that this is among the highest country in Southeast Asia. The second part is digital payment is the main driver for the financial services at this moment. Especially with the focus from the government and regulators in terms of boosting the cashless economy as well as the financial inclusion. Looking at the GMV, we are forecasting, the numbers, the GMV grow, probably 4 times, in the 5 years from 2020 to 2025, and we believe that Vietnam will be surpassing the other countries just behind Indonesia in terms of GMV by 2025. Surpassing Malaysia, surpassing Thailand as the countries. In terms of digital payment user, we do believe that by 2025 we will have about 105 million of the digital payment user. In fact, in 2018, in one of our surveys from PwC, we do see that the increase from the in-store mobile payment in Vietnam. We have the highest growth rates of 61%, from 37 to 61%. So this is really a proof point of the very high potential of the digital economy. Next chart, please. And then now, if you're looking at the banking sectors, first of all, it's digital payment is growing by 8% compound average growth rate for the last few years. And especially during the COVID time, according to the State Bank report in the first quarter of 2020, the payment actually increased 180% within the few months of the COVID when it's hit to Vietnam. And if you look at the landscape, then the numbers of the bank in Vietnam it doesn't increase, but at the same time, the demand for the payment and lending services are actually, growing. So this is the area where we see the most booming. Not only talking about the 36 electronic wallet license being issued, among the probably 26 operating bank at this moment in the countries. And if you look at the top bank, we do see that the growth both in terms of total managed assets as well as the profit in the last 3 years, despite all the impact of the COVID to the economy. In terms of fintechs, I would say that it's grow in the search of the digital transactions, booming e-commerce, and with the government support. If you look at the portfolio of the fintech, then probably 1/3 of the fintech is actually focusing on payment, followed by lending, 16%, and also the other technology coming, such as like blockchain, POS. We, in terms of investment into the landscape, into the fintech landscape, we see it triple in the last 3 years, 2015 to 2020, and especially in the first quarter of 2020, when the COVID started hitting Vietnam, we do see that incremental of 100 million coming into the fintech investment into Vietnam, and then this is quite significant considering that the size of the economy as well as the growing numbers of the fintech companies. Next chart, please. And this is if you look at this, the landscape is quite diverse, right? Amtalk is focusing on very much in terms of payment and lending, especially the peer-to-peer lending. We do see that the insurtech, blockchain are the two areas which is emerging in the next 5 years, which is we believe that it will help the shaping the very different landscape in the fintech startup in Vietnam. And if you look at the numbers of the fintech, we do believe that there's anywhere between 200 to 300 fintech, any give and take at any moment, and it's cover quite breadth, the wide spectrum of the area of the focus, right? And then with that, let me also conclude my sharing by the area where probably if you set foot into Vietnam, where you want to play. Can you go back? Can you go to the next slide, please? So if you look at the looking set up to play into the financial services, then probably fintech and then non-financial services platform is the way to really invest into. If you go into the merger and acquisition, definitely some of the what we call zero down buying, as well as the growing established fintech such as like Momo, BNPay, numbers of the other fintech is where really to put the money in. And then if you look at the partnership, then numbers of the new digital banking player as well as the non-financial services player is here in Vietnam to play with, right? So with that, probably let me pause here to see if any first reaction, any comment. Otherwise, I just pass it to the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Long. I think if we have any comments, please ensure that you put them in the Q&A, and we're running on time, so I think we'll have time for a few questions at the end. But thanks so much, Long, and that presentation just demonstrates the depth and the breadth of fintech opportunity here in Vietnam. So thank you for your insights. We're honoured to be joined also today by Mr. Hung Nguyen, President of the Vietnam Fintech Club and an expert on fintech regulatory developments. Hung is also Deputy CEO of NAPAS, Vietnam's National Payments Corporation, playing a vital role in payments processing here in Vietnam. So on that note, thank you, and over to you, Hung.
Okay, so thank you very much. So everyone can hear me?
Yes, very well. Thanks, Hung.
Okay, so good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So it's my pleasure to be here in this webinar to provide you with the regular landscape regarding the fintech in Vietnam. So I think in the first presentation, so Mr. Long helped me to provide you with the overall map of fintech landscape in Vietnam. But here I can share with you another map that you can may find on the internet. So as you can see on the screen, this is the map, the fintech company in Vietnam of 2020. So although there are around 200 companies in various categories, such as payment, lending, credit scoring, blockchain, cryptocurrency, digital banking, crowdfunding, etc. And what we can see here, the payment in P2P lending and or digital lendings, as you can see here, are the most crowded. And we can say that the payment service and banking related service is under rather many regulation, but digital lending is and other few sensitive category are still unregulated. And blockchain and digital and digital lending are also few areas with the number of fintech are operating, but none of those have laws to regulate at the moment. If you want to provide the digital bank service in Vietnam, you also need to collaborate with the closely with the bank for the banking license. So in this presentation today, I would like to provide you with a legal framework in 3 areas from my viewpoints. The first area is the current existing development of the regulation that directly support to the fintech business activity in Vietnam at the moment. The second area is some other legal document that might be considered if you are a fintech or especially if you are a foreign company. And the third one is the future development that is highly impacted the fintechs. So on your screen, this is the list of the government direction on the digital payment and fintech development. The most recent 3 documents are considered the important and have a highly impact on the markets. Notably, in this October, the minister just signed the decision on the development of non-cash payment during the period of 2021-2025. One of the targets of the project is the value of the non-cash payment is projected to be about 25 times higher than the GDP by 2025, while non-cash payment in e-commerce is estimated to reach 50% of the total transactions. So under the project, Vietnam is also expected to achieve about 20-25% growth rate in the number of volume and the value for the non-cash payment transaction in the next 5 years. So to achieve the targets, the project will implement the various solutions such as the completing the related legal corridor and framework, upgrading the payment infrastructure to be able to connect and integrate with the other system, and developing a modern payment service and promoting the non-cash payment in the public sector. So this is to say how the ambitious the government is and how they expect the growth of the fintech industry. The resolution 100 is also critical, since it provides the testing mechanism for the fintech and banking industry to carry out the new service in fintech especially. Before this resolution, I think it is a little risky to run a fintech in a new area like a P2P lending or cryptocurrency, but hopefully I think by the end of next year or early next year, the new resolution for the regulatory sandbox will be commenced. The decision 316 is also critical to the market because it opened a door to the mobile operator in Vietnam to enter the digital payment with a very high penetration of smartphone and internet, like Mr. Long said in his presentation. So in the last 2 weeks, the first 3, the largest mobile operator were officially granted the pilot license to run the mobile money in the next 2 years. So the next slide, the list of decision and circular from the Central Bank of Vietnam or SBV in payment industry. And if you have the plan to take part in the fintech with the payment or banking focus in Vietnam, you have to be carefully review this, and you might be required a license to operate. You can take the circular 39 as an example. So this circular provide the guideline for the payment intermediary service. And right now, I think there are more than 40 payment service providers that are granted the license in Vietnam. And the latest decision on digital transformation is highlighted a clear roadmap for Central Bank of Vietnam to pursue a comprehensive renovation in management for financial inclusion and sustainable development. This plan addresses the increase in knowledge about the digital transformation in the banking industry, the detail on the building and the perfecting of the legal framework to facilitate the digital transformation process in the banking industry and the development of digital infrastructures. Besides the regulatory framework that directly support the fintech business and activities. So this is another list of the relating legal document that you have to can review and consider when you work in Vietnam. So for example, you can see the law, Vietnam also has a law on electronic transactions, which describe how electronic transactions are legally accepted, or some laws on ICT that can have the requirement for any company if you want to provide the OTT service, you need to have the IT infrastructure that should be installed and set up in Vietnam. So all of these supporting laws and regulations are the legal framework that all stakeholders that operate in financial and payment or in fintech need to be aware of and to comply. Okay, so in this part, we will see what is going on in the near future for the upcoming legal and review and updates. This update and revision is supposed to have the critical impact on the payment and banking related industry. The revision are expected to be issued in December this year or early next year, and have completed having a few rounds of sharing for public opinions. A lot of comment from the market player around the approach of the central bank on agent banking in terms of criteria to be an agent for the banks, and some restriction relating to transaction limit. However, traditionally, the government would take, I can say that a cautious approach for any introduction of the new financial service at the moment. So regarding the foreign ownership cap, many investors expect the government will reconsider the cap. So right now it's just 49%, but hopefully they will raise the cap. And however, the new version of the draft decree has yet to be published. That is for the revision of decree, the 101. And regarding the, I think we in the first part, in first area, we are talking about the resolution 100. So in this resolution, so the government want to set the roadmap to issue the regulatory sandbox. So hopefully by the end of this year or early next year, they will try to officially provide the official guideline for all the fintech company to provide the service in a regulatory sandbox. So I think this is a very good opportunity for the fintech company, so they can feel comfortable to provide and operate in the service in key areas such as credit scoring, P2P lending, digital lending, open API, and other solutions for that apply the innovation. So I think to wrap up my presentation, I can say that the regulatory framework in Vietnam is expected to have a further development in the next few years. In the payment and digital lending, I think it's rather okay, but I think it needs more updated and revision. Besides, the government had to recognize how important the fintech companies will play a critical role in the national economy in the digital transformation era. So Vietnamese government are trying its best to upgrade and improve the regulation framework for the new service in companies like fintechs. So this can be a good signal for foreign investors to come to Vietnam for fintech areas. However, the government are still having the conservative approach. So more area of the fintech are still not yet tapped and addressed in the coming time. For example, InsurTech. And the last one, if you are a fintech player, you have to consider to apply for a license when required. For example, the payment license services that is regulated in Circular 39. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation. So hopefully, if you have any question, you can email or send to me. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hung. We greatly appreciate your advice and experience, and there's a lot to cover there in terms of the regulatory development. So it's very generous of you to offer your assistance as well, and certainly through Austrade with Nhung, we can connect you to those regulations that are pertinent to your industry as you're entering the market. So thank you to our two presenters. We'll now move to our panel discussion to hear from those who have successfully operated here in Vietnam. And I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Quang Huynh, CEO of Deutsche Bank Vietnam, Tim Arman, Global Head of FinTech at BDO, Pedram Gavonlu, Chief Technology Officer at Australian FinTech company Salt Group. So Quang has led Deutsche Bank Vietnam since July 2020. Prior to that, Quang was CEO of Vietnam's Maritime Bank and has led significant growth strategies at both international and local banks. As a partner at BDO, Tim provides audit and assurance services to the financial services industry. Prior to BDO, Tim was KPMG International's Global Head of Audit Deployment and Communications, working in Vietnam from 2007 to 2012. And Pedram of Salt Group has over 20 years experience in the IT industry, specialising in authentication and identity technologies, spanning a spectrum of advanced security technology and mobile platforms. So thank you to our panellists for joining us today. Tim, the first question for you. So you've got experience living and working in Vietnam. What do you see as the unique offering that Vietnam has to offer in the fintech market?
Thanks, Fan. Firstly, I'd probably just talk a little bit about, I was in Vietnam for 5 years, and it was a fantastic experience for myself personally and professionally. At that time, I was working with KPMG and was based in Hanoi, and it was a fantastic time for the family. One of our Vietnamese friends, told us the first year we arrived, Vietnam is same but different, and that's probably a good example of what it is. And I think Vietnam, it was a great place to live. The people were extremely friendly, great opportunities. People were receptive to new ideas, and so from that experience, it was quite good. And from a personal perspective, obviously, just immersing myself in the culture, in terms of, and I think that's probably, I'll talk about that a little bit more, later on as well. But I think for Australian companies looking to go to Vietnam, understanding the culture and where you're going to be operating is very important. In terms of the fintech market in Vietnam, obviously it's quite exciting in terms of what's been happening in Vietnam from when I've left. Hearing some of the stories, from our two presenters before, just in terms of the government clearly is behind the fintech strategy, just in terms of the sandbox, which is very comparable to what the Australian regulators, have already introduced down here in terms of providing a platform for innovation, as well as, sort of laying out the digital pathway to 2025. Again, when I was in Vietnam, there was a lot of increase in wealth was, the financial inclusion was starting back there. It's good to see that the government is focused on that, and that sort of aligns very, very well to a lot of the Australian fintechs, which a lot of those have a purpose and a mission statement, which I think would align to what's trying to happen in Vietnam. I think if you just look at the simple demographics of Vietnam, over 97 million people, well-educated, willing to try different things. It's an underbanked, heavily underbanked and unbanked, part of the world. So it's great from a payment digital banking perspective. And it's good to see that the currency is moving from when I was there. I walked the streets of In God We Trust USD, and now you're going to a cashless society. So it's good to see that that's starting to happen. And then it reminds me in terms of some of the investment trends. You're starting to see a lot of investors coming back to Vietnam. And that's kind of those heady days when I was there in 2007, 2009, before the GFC, you had a lot of people looking to come into the market. So I think Vietnam's well placed, quite receptive to global organizations. And hopefully we'll see a lot of Vietnamese fintechs really take off over the next couple of years.
Tim, and it is amazing to think almost a decade ago it was very much cash-based, and to move to a cashless society, or almost to a cashless society as we are now. But as you said, still so many more opportunities given the level of underbankedness here. So Quang, on that note, as an experienced banking executive, I'd be interested to hear your experience working with foreign fintechs and any advice you have in terms of the key considerations that fintech should have in working with Vietnamese banks.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Yes, in my previous capacity as the CEO of Maritime Bank, we've been working with a number of foreign fintech partners, and it covers various fields, including retail lending, including building a digital banking platform, eKYC, credit scoring, even in credit card issuance business. So I mean, back then when we started these type of collaborations with foreign fintech partners, the perception from the local banking, I would say, senior executives team was still quite cautious towards fintechs. At that moment, I'm talking about three years ago. Banks were still thinking fintech as competitors rather than potential partners. But we believe that in terms of technological advancement, innovative thinking, creative thinking, and focus, I think banks will need to team up with fintech partners in order to be able to do a better job, and therefore we work with fintech partners. I think to your question, I think foreign fintech partners, when working with banks, I think there are a few things that you should bear in mind. First of all, banking is a very heavily regulated sector in Vietnam. I think it's well regulated everywhere else, but particularly in Vietnam, I think it's quite heavily regulated by the central bank. And because banking is a very sensitive and vital economic sector, playing a very important role in the macro stability of the economy, and therefore the central bank is taking a very strong control in terms of banking activities. Therefore, I think like shared by Mr. Hùng early on, until now, fintechs are only able to, I would say, scratching the surface in terms of banking service, and still have to work with banks to penetrate the market. So yes, so first of all, banks is well regulated. Secondly, because it's well regulated, it is also quite bureaucratic. So you need to be patient because a lot of approvals have to be obtained in order to go ahead with any partnership, particularly when it comes to foreign partnership as well. So I think those are the key two I think key two areas that foreign fintech should be aware of. And then I think is once you set up a partnership, then it also takes time to build up the trust, and also to get people to familiarize with the new process. Because again, traditionally banks heavy in paperwork, and the approval of new products takes a lot of time. So yeah, be patient. Just be prepared to spend time with your local partner, get to understand, like Tim mentioned about the culture. Get to understand the culture, understand how people think and operate, and it will come out well. I think the partnership that we established for Maritime Bank is still working quite well until now. There are actually several partners operating in the lending sectors, still operating with MSB through using MSB lending license to do business in Vietnam.
Fantastic. Thanks, Quang. And I think very valuable advice across whatever sector you are. Understanding the role of the state-owned enterprises and the regulatory environment as well are crucial. So thank you for that. Flipping around, Pedram, as an Australian company that's successfully exported to Vietnam with a large deployment of technology already, what are some of your experiences in working with a large Vietnamese financial institution?
Sure, thanks, Shannon. I guess as background, I guess our deployment in Vietnam is of our MFA product. Now, MFA is multi-factor authentication. So the product is used by a tier 1 Vietnamese bank for high assurance authentication of user identity and transaction signing. So this is for their online banking across their retail and business customers. And we've supported them out of Australia without a local partner. So my experiences of working with them, I'd say there's definitely a willingness to adopt new technology and innovations, particularly where it solves a problem. In fact, what's interesting is some of our product advancements were first deployed in Vietnam, and a year or so after, the same features were rolled out by our Australian customers. And the other sort of I guess experience is once we sort of established trust and were seen as subject matter experts, we really became the go-to partner to solve some of their challenges. And these challenges were sort of based on things like customer feedback, pain points, regulatory requirements. And we really addressed those through product features and also extensions to our product. An example would be there was moving them from having complicated password policies for internet banking that resulted in a lot of help desk calls and customer complaints to a passwordless login with a biometric multi-factor authentication. So I'd say overall, they've been definitely a very valued customer for us.
Fantastic, thanks, Pedram. And following on, this is a little self-indulgent, but with Austrade, we obviously work closely with you in the market. So I think for the Australian companies who are on the call, who perhaps haven't used Austrade services before, can you just give us a bit of a feedback, I suppose, or your experience in working with our team and how we assisted in market?
Sure. So I guess the deployment I mentioned before is really based out of Ho Chi Minh City. And we were looking at going into the financial sector in Hanoi. This was back in 2019, before the pandemic hit. So we use Austrade services, and I was part of 2 of the missions to Hanoi to do this. And I'd say the experiences from those missions is, I think first we got really fantastic access to financial institutions and senior people all through Austrade. And I think that would have been really connections we would have struggled to get on our own if we didn't use Austrade. I would say I was very impressed by how quickly Austrade, and Nuong, who's on the call, picked up our product and value proposition, which is fairly technical. I mean, we've had our own salespeople have kind of struggled with it over the years, but she picked it up quite well. And I think that really helped in getting us in the meetings and also preparing the audience for what they would sort of expect. So I think having Austrade and also I think having Austrade in our meetings and subsequent sort of follow-up calls was an advantage for us, just to have a Vietnamese speaker who understood our product pitch. Because there's sometimes you still get gaps in communication just due to language and people like me probably speaking too fast, or people not understanding accents and so forth. So I think for fintechs looking to export into Vietnam, I would say that Austrade is going to be a very valuable asset and resource.
Thanks, Pedram. We appreciate it. And obviously, most of that credit, or nearly all of it, certainly goes to Nuong, who will be presenting afterwards. So thank you, Nuong. Quang, what does Deutsche Bank or a Vietnamese bank look for in a foreign business to become a successful domestic partner with you? Sorry, Quang, we may have lost you there.
Oh, sorry. I'm
no problem at all.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, I would be looking for foreign partners who have the right products for me to capture the targeted market segment that that my bank are focusing on. So I think that's key. And then obviously one who is understanding the local culture. Because we know, let's say, working with foreign partners, professionalism is always there. But some partners they appreciate the local nuances, the local culture, and therefore it helps with when both sides understand what's on the table and what are the challenges. We work together, we overcome together. Well, we can have trust and build lasting relationship. Then I think we can build a successful partnership. I think one example was in my in my previous role as CEO of a local bank. We work with a quite well-known international fintech partner, and we have been successful in bringing them into the market. So So once they work with us, they establish the name in the market, then everybody start looking towards what we have done with them successfully, and then knocking on their doors, and they become partners of many other big financial institutions. So I think yes, key is when you come into the market, you find the right partner, so that you can build a successful business, and then other business opportunities will come your way. Thank you,
Thanks, Quang. That's good advice. Just following on from that, Tim, given your experience here in Hanoi and your connection to Vietnam since, interested in what you see as the key challenges for Australian fintech companies operating in Vietnam, and also any advice you have in overcoming those challenges.
Thanks, Shannon. I think some of it the other panelists have talked a little bit about. So, some of the obvious ones are, kind of the legal structure and the regulatory framework, which has already been covered. I think, again, in my time in Vietnam, I think the government works at a certain pace, and sometimes they change tact, and I think you just have to be aware of that. When I was there during the global financial crisis, and I think on the 21st of December, the State Bank of Vietnam decided no bad debts for Vietnamese banks, which didn't sort of align with sort of international accounting standards. So I think you just have to be aware that Vietnam and the government will follow a pathway, and sometimes that slightly can change. So you just have to be ready for that. I think some of the other points around culture, language, I think, is quite important. And I think just trying to get yourself used to how business is being done. Clearly, if you've been operating in another Southeast Asia region, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to transition, into Vietnam. I think in terms of, how you overcome some of those challenges, we've talked a little bit about partnerships, and I've talked a little bit with Stu from a FinTech Australia perspective, is the importance of partnerships. And clearly when you're going cross-border, that becomes more and more important. So, making sure that you are aligning with, a comparable value organization in Vietnam is quite important. Building out your trusted advisors. So I think that, people that come into Vietnam, you need to know who your go-to team is, and you need to build those relationships. And as Quang mentioned, this can be long lasting. So you want to make sure you pick those and you follow their advice, and probably get great staff on the ground. That's probably really important to get someone who, understands the local language, can speak it, and also can help you navigate some of those particular challenges.
Thanks very much, Tim. And just echoing that advice, as Trade Commissioner, I've met many businesses, both investors here and exporters, and having a good partner or good partners is nearly always the number one piece of advice, but always up there at the top. So I think, great advice. Thank you, Quang, Pedram, and Tim, for your generous insights today. It's hard to cover so much in the short time that we did have, but we appreciate your generosity, and I think we will have some time for Q&A, and those that we can't get to, we can obviously take on notice. So as the final part of today's session, I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Nhung Chan, Business Development Manager based here in the Hanoi office, to share her views on why Vietnam and why now. Nhung works closely with Australian fintechs on the ground, and through her networks and her industry knowledge helps Australian fintech companies on a daily basis. So thank you, Nhung, and now over to you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks everyone, and thank you for staying on until this moment. And at the conclusion of our meeting today, I would like to give you some key takeaways about why Vietnam, why now, for you to take into account as you plan your business plan in the next year, 2022. Next slide, please. The first key takeaway I wanted to give to you is the Vietnam digital economy growth. Vietnam digital economy growth is forecast to grow at the fastest rate in the region in the next 4 years, at about 30% per annum. And this rate of growth has been materialized in the last 2 consecutive years in Vietnam. And this growth has been seen across a number of areas, including e-commerce, transport, food delivery, digital media, and financial services. And in particular, on the right-hand side, you will see this is a projection of the growth in revenue of digital financial services in Vietnam in the next 4 years, according to a recent research by Bain and Temasek. Next slide, please. So the question is, what drives this growth in digital services in Vietnam? In our opinion, there are two drivers. The first is consumer digital readiness. If you look at the number of internet users in Vietnam, you will see that 6 years ago, there were only 44 million internet users. But this has grown to 69 million just this year. And another interesting fact about Vietnam is Gen Z population. Gen Z is defined as those who are born after 1997. And these are the population that are born and be surrounded with technology services. And they currently make up the majority of TikTok users in Vietnam. It is forecast that by 2025, Gen Z will take up almost 30% of the working age population in Vietnam. And we believe that Gen Z will have a substantial impact in the consumer market and technology adoption in Vietnam in the next few years. The right graph will just show you the increase in engagement with mobile banking apps in Vietnam last year during the pandemic. Next slide. COVID has a global impact, and it has indeed caused real challenges to the Vietnam economy. However, on the flip side, I would say COVID has also been a real digital accelerator in Vietnam. I pulled together here for you a few key findings according to very recent surveys regarding financial habits of Vietnamese consumers. According to McKinsey's survey in 2021, they found that 82% of Vietnamese consumers currently use digital banking at least once a month. And this is a significant growth if you compare just a few years ago. The State Bank of Vietnam recently shared with us that they also have been very astonished by the rate of growth in digital payment, in particular mobile payment and internet payment in Vietnam. In the last 5 years, the average growth of mobile payment in Vietnam has been around 100% per annum in terms of both volume of transactions and the value of transactions. So I would say this is pretty remarkable, given that Vietnam has been a pretty much cash-dominated economy, where 90% of transactions were in cash just a few years ago. And I think this topic of cashless payment has been mentioned many times by our various speakers today since the beginning. Another driver that we think is driving Vietnamese digital services growth is the increasing spending power of the Vietnamese consumers. If you look at Vietnam for the last 30 years, Vietnam has seen really sustainable economic growth of about 6 to 6.5%. But what is more I would say impressive is last year in 2020, Vietnam still registered 2.9% of GDP growth, while many other countries and global GDP was negative. And this placed Vietnam in the top 20 best performing economies globally. And this certainly set the good foundation for our economy to recover, hopefully in the next few years with the pandemic. Next slide. So switching gears a little bit, we talked about the drivers of digital growth in Vietnam being consumer digital readiness and increasing economic power. Looking forward, I think there are a few key factors that will help to enable Vietnam to even go faster in the growth path in the next 10 years. First of all, I want to talk about the tech talent in Vietnam. And with tech talent, this refers to two pools of talent. Number one is the software technology development workforce, who are very young and who are very eager to learn in Vietnam. And second is what I see is the influx of Vietnamese who have studied overseas, who have worked overseas, and come back to Vietnam and bringing with them global ambitions and a world-class set of business skills. And it's no surprise that in Vietnam, in the last 12 months, we have seen 2 new tech unicorns. One is Axie Infinity, which is a digital blockchain-based digital gaming company. And the other is VNPay, which is a digital payment company. And VNG is the very first ever unicorn in Vietnam from some years ago. The other enabler of growth for Vietnam is what Pedram talked about, is the openness of banks and companies in Vietnam to take up new technologies. This is a graph that I pulled from a recent research from IDC that shows the maturity of banks in Vietnam compared to the region. And you will see that Vietnamese banks are still at the earlier stage of scalability of digital technologies. However, this is changing because many banks in Vietnam are starting to modernize their banking infrastructure. Next. So these are just 5 areas of technology investment that I put together. You will see that big data and artificial intelligence are currently an area of focus for banks in Vietnam. It's still early stage, but it's increasingly getting attention from banks in Vietnam. And followed from that is open banking, cloud computing, and also a blockchain, an area that is very emerging, but we expect to see growth in the next few years. Okay, finally, before we wrap up, it's worth mentioning that all of this that we talk about is sitting on top of very low banking penetration rate, very low credit cards, insurance and investment penetration rate in Vietnam. In Vietnam now, credit card penetration is only less than 5%. Life insurance penetration by total premium is only at 1.5% of GDP, very much lower than global average. And also retail investment is still very low. However, if you follow Vietnam development, you will see that this is changing and developing fast, given the stock market development in Vietnam in the last 2 years. Okay, we will come to the final slide. So as Mr. Hùng said, we are very fortunate in Vietnam because we are supported by a very strong regulator who is making a real progress towards building a very strong and supportive fintech regulatory framework in Vietnam. And this is evident by the fintech steering committee being established and also the recent release of new policies. So all these factors together point to a very fertile ground of Vietnam as a market for you to consider for fintech consumption. There are challenges along the way, but we, Austrade, is available here to help. And I will end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nhuong. We're running on time, which is great. So we'll now move to our Q&A, and I'll hand back to Stu to moderate the questions.
Thanks very much, Shannon, and thank you, Nhuong, for that presentation. That was great, and it's phenomenal to see the growth in mobile payments. There continues to be 100%. We do have one question so far that has come in, and I'll direct to Hung Nguyen if possible. If anyone else has questions from the audience, please feel free to put them in the chat box now. Mr. Hung, we have a question from Ashish that has come through. How is DeFi, decentralized finance, moving in Vietnam? Is there any startups working in the DeFi space?
It's to perhaps maybe we could guide to another speaker. Yes, Mr. Hung.
Okay, no problem. Nhuong, would you like to nominate another speaker for that question? Or Nhuong, would you like to respond to that question yourself, if possible?
Yeah, I guess we could share with Mr. Long and Mr. Quang, but then I could perhaps provide a few initial thoughts. I think decentralized finance and blockchain is strongly developed in Vietnam. In fact, Vietnam considers itself to could potentially be ahead of many other countries in the world in terms of blockchain development. So we have seen a number of new blockchain startups in Vietnam, and for example, Axie Infinity, It's a blockchain-based digital game company that recently became a unicorn in Vietnam. That shows the strength of development in Vietnam in the decentralized finance sector.
That's great. Thanks very much, Neil. And I have heard a lot about Axie Infinity recently in the blockchain space over here in Australia as well. So it's far-reaching and certainly has made its unicorn status. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box, but we will move to wrap up shortly. Just reading through this one now. Tim Amman, I might jump over to you for this one if possible. Question is, should the relatively low income level of the large percentage of Vietnamese population be a key challenge for growth in InsurTech? Or did you have any other comments on that as well? Thanks very much.
Yeah, so specifically low income levels on InsurTech opportunities. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Nung sort of laid out some facts in terms of who is using banking products. And again, if I flash back to when I was in Vietnam, you had a lot of the big insurance companies trying to buy percentage interest in Bao Viet, for example. Because you look at the fact that it's a population that isn't using insurance. I think it's probably, you have to look at the timing of when InsurTech would be used. I would probably say there's other parts of the fintech ecosystem that will probably get up to speed quicker, mostly around payments, digital banking, perhaps wealth tech before you get to InsurTech.
Thanks very much for that, Tim. Just from the FinTech Australia side, a huge thank you to all of our amazing panelists. And now I'd like to pass back to Shannon to wrap up the session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stu. And echoing Stu, a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights today and your generosity in sharing your knowledge. So thank you. And while travel conditions obviously at the moment remain uncertain, the Austrade team stands ready to assist, and we can assist here through market research, customer introductions, partner introductions, and helping to guide you through the regulatory environment. So if you're a fintech company looking to crack Vietnam, please don't hesitate to reach out via Stu or directly to Nung and I. And as our panelists have said here today, also offering their knowledge, we'd encourage you to reach out to people on the ground who have already had success here in market and would be happy to share their experience, I'm sure. So thank you again, Stu. Thank you to our panelists and all the best. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.